I'm Ann Hesse, and I lead the Democrats Abroad Global Women's Caucus. And thanks so much for coming to today's special briefing on messaging and strategies around the abortion topic. Well, reproductive justice has always been at the very top of our priority list at GWC. As many of you know, one of our largest action teams is devoted to it. Women are gearing up and mobilizing around the world to defend reproductive freedom. Tomorrow, September 28th, is International Safe Abortion Day. And on October 8th, Women's March is hitting the streets again for a women's wave. For us at Democrats Abroad, though, these last crucial weeks before the election are all about mobilizing our overseas voters. If you haven't seen our GWC GOTV toolkit yet, please do take a look. It's full of ideas, large, medium, and small, on how you can help get out the vote. Angela will put the link in the chat box, or it's on our website too, you'll see it. We've all seen throughout this election season that this issue has become a major mobilizing factor. Just look at the surge in voter registrations among women. We've seen that Democrats can fight for abortion rights and win even among independents and Republicans. We know that this is a winning issue for us, but we also know that the way we talk about the issue with our diverse audiences that span the political spectrum can make all the difference. And this is why I'm so grateful to my friend, colleague, and co-host today, and birthday girl, Martha McDevitt Pugh. In the middle of a DNC briefing on messaging that she attended a few weeks ago, she texted me and said, "Oh God, you gotta see this." And so that's why we're here today. Martha has held multiple leadership roles within Democrats Abroad over many years. She was a founder and now serves as vice chair of our LGBTQ+ caucus, and she's also one of our DA representatives to the DNC and is a member of the DNC Women's Caucus. She is one of our most experienced leaders on the Democrats Abroad team. Also co-hosting today is Angela Fobbs, the founder and former chair of the DA Global Black Caucus and current DA Germany Wiesbaden chapter chair. She serves in many other capacities, including work on the GWC Steering Committee, the DA Environment Council, and the Global IT team. She'll be gathering questions for Celinda from our chat box on Zoom and on Facebook, where we're streaming live. So you're welcome to type in your questions as we go along. Well, since we have Martha to thank for arranging this briefing, I will have to introduce Martha.
Thank you so much, Anne, and good morning and afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to introduce Celinda Lake today. I've had the opportunity to attend presentations of her research, and I have no doubt you're going to be empowered to learn about her recent work today, which will really prepare us to work full out to mobilize voters for the election that is 42 days away. Celinda is one of the Democratic Party's leading political strategists. She was one of two lead pollsters for the Biden campaign in 2020 and continues to serve as a pollster to the Democratic National Committee, other National Party committees, and dozens of Democratic incumbents and challengers at all levels of the electoral process. Celinda and her firm, Lake Research Partners, are known for cutting-edge research on issues including the economy, healthcare, environment, and education, and have worked for a number of institutions that'll be well known to many of you, including NARAL, the Human Rights Campaign, Planned Parenthood, the Next Generation, Emily's List, Vote Bets Action Fund, and the Kaiser Family Foundation. Her interviews and statistics have been quoted in the Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, as well as a variety of magazines, including Newsweek, Glamour, and Marie Claire. Celinda has also appeared on numerous television and radio news programs to discuss her work and provide expert commentary, including CNN, MSNBC, CNBC, Fox News, and NPR. Celinda is one of the nation's foremost experts on electing women candidates and on framing issues to women voters. American politics calls Celinda a super strategist, or better yet, the godmother, and Working Woman says she is arguably the most influential woman in her field. She is renowned for her groundbreaking research on single women voters in conjunction with the Voter Participation Center, and has helped elect numerous female candidates, including Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, former Senator Barbara Mikulski, also known as the Dean of Women Senators, former Arizona Governor Janet Napolitano, former Houston Mayor Anise Parker, former Attorney General Patricia Madrid, the first Hispanic woman Attorney General in New Mexico, and former Senator Carol Moseley Brown in her historic victory to become the first African-American woman to be elected to the United States Senate. Celinda has also worked with Speaker Nancy Pelosi, the first female Speaker of the House. Celinda is a native of Montana, born and raised on a ranch, and one of the political world's most avid whitewater rafters. She holds a master's degree in political science and survey research from the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor and a certificate in political science from the University of Geneva in Switzerland. Celinda received her undergraduate degree from Smith College in Massachusetts, where she graduated summa cum laude and was recently awarded the Distinguished Alumni Medal by the college. She received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Association of Political Consultants and Republican Ed Goes for her work on the Grabbelbaum poll. So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Celinda and invite you to take the floor. Please go.
Thank you, Martha, and thank you all for having me. I am absolutely delighted to be with you all and really, really appreciate the work that you do and the fight that we're all engaged in around the abortion issue. So what I'm going to share with you is just kind of a quick an overview and of the abortion issue, and then really eager to take your questions more broadly. And I will say this: if Democrats gain seats in the Senate, and if we hold on to the House or keep our losses down, it will be 2/3 due to the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And while that is an astounding price that we have to pay, it really has changed the landscape for this year's elections. But it's really important to figure out how to talk about this issue, how people are thinking about this issue. So I'll share all of that with you. And the Republicans are engaged right now in coming back very, very aggressively on this issue. So all of the slides that I'm going to share with you, you can get from the Women's Caucus. And there will be brand new data that the DNC is putting together for the September 30th Women's Caucus, Women's Forum briefing. So if you're not part of that, be sure and sign up because there'll be even newer data then. But let's put the slides up and let's look at the first slide. And if we, thank you so much. And let's move it to the first slide. So right now, a solid majority of voters say abortion will be important for their vote for Congress this year. Abortion is especially important to women, Democrats, liberals, African-American, and Latino voters. And two things that are very, very interesting about the abortion issue. One is you're constantly going to hear this debate in the States, and I'm sure you've seen it in the press about, well, is it going to be abortion or the economy? For Democrats, abortion is, along with gun violence and climate change, is the number one issue for Democrats. So in terms of getting out the vote, and that is where we are, that's the most important game for us right now, is getting out the vote. Abortion is going to play a very, very large role. And we've seen dramatic increases in registration of women voters. We saw that with the Kansas initiative, seen dramatic increases across a number of battleground states, particularly of women under 40 registering to vote. The second thing is, voters are capable of worrying about more than one thing at a time. We can walk and chew gum at the same time, particularly women. So a lot of women are weighing both the economy and abortion as an issue, and abortion has an economic element to it. One of the most important economic decisions a woman will ever make in her life is whether or not to have a child or how many children to have. The third thing is that when you think about the economy and inflation, which is dominating voters' minds economically, many voters think that neither party is doing a particularly good job, and they don't think there's a particularly good distinction between the two parties. They also don't look to their individual member of Congress to fix the economy. They do look to their president to fix the economy, but they don't look to their senator or member of Congress to fix the economy. So the abortion issue is very, very different. It is a very clear choice here. And it is an issue where individual office holders have made it worse. So individual office holders should make it better. And we are running very, very hard right now on the national ban, that the Republicans are proposing the national ban. Other issues that are very important: birth control. This is especially important for Latinas. Some white women are skeptical that birth control will be prohibited or limited. Latinas are not. Latinas, interestingly, know from the laws in Central America and South America that when abortion was outlawed, so were some forms of birth control. And finally, abortion very, very strong when we link it to other issues like national paid leave, equal pay. So linking it to a broader view of how the Republicans see women is a very, very powerful piece of the puzzle as well. One thing I would suggest to you right away is don't get into a debate about weeks. One of the things I will share with you is Americans are terrible at math, and they're not too much better at biology. So people have no idea how long 15 weeks is. They have no idea how many weeks there are in a pregnancy. One of my favorite stories about doing work on the abortion issue is we were doing work about the Roe frame and the 3 trimesters. And we had been talking to a bunch of guy and male voters. And one guy finally said about halfway through the group, well, how many trimesters are there in a pregnancy? And I thought, oh boy, this guy's going to get slammed down. People are going to go, try is 3, stupid. And in fact, everybody in the group said, boy, I'm so glad you asked that question. I've been wondering that myself. So Americans not good at math and maybe not very good at biology either. An astounding number of voters say that they will vote on the abortion issue. 2/3 of voters would vote to protect abortion, including 48% who will definitely vote to protect abortion. And what's interesting is that before, it was always the pro-life voters and the anti-choice voters who were most energized on the choice issue. Now, for the first time in decades, it's the pro-choice voters who are energized, who are turning out because of it, who say they will weigh it. The pro-life voters tend to be more complacent, actually. Voters overwhelmingly believe that Democrats are better on the issue than Republicans on abortion. And that is particularly true among independent voters. It is energizing for Democratic voters. And it is particularly true for our Democratic women candidates. Democratic men have an advantage, but Democratic women have twice the advantage. So whether you're talking about persuading those last undecided voters, mobilizing voters, drawing a clear contrast with your opponent, abortion is a central issue for this campaign. There's going to be in September and October at least $6.8 billion worth of advertising spent in the United States in federal races. And 1/3 of the Democratic media, at least, will be on the abortion issue. If we look at the next slide, besides not debating weeks, and we want to call the 15-week ban, a national ban, other things to know about language. First of all, sometimes we can be so strong in our language that we can demobilize people, make them feel like it's helpless, it's too late now. And words like decimate, destroy, gut tend to demobilize people. It makes them feel like there's nothing I can do. Language like dismantle, unravel, take away our freedoms, all of that describes a process and is much, much more persuasive to voters. Messaging needs to be values-oriented, no acronyms. Leave your acronyms at home. And freedom is the top value, followed by empathy. Everyone should have the freedom to decide. Everyone has unique circumstances. Everyone should decide for themselves. Notice I'm using the word decide, not choose. Choose sounds less responsible to people. Decide sounds like it's thoughtful and an important decision. It's also strong to characterize the other side as supporting bans on abortion with no exception for rape or incest and prohibiting birth control. And the birth control issue can be very, very strong in this dialogue as well. One last thing about abortion. The 2022 elections would be a disaster for us if they were solely a referendum. what we needed to do, and the president's been very active on this, is make it a contrast, make it a choice. And the abortion issue has had the ability to really make it a clear choice. So let's go look at some of this data and see what you think. First of all, if we advance the next slide and then the next slide, here's what people are focused on. And you can see the economy is the top issue, but notice that abortion has risen pretty steadily as an issue. And as I said, for Democrats, particularly surge Democrats, people who don't have a history of voting in off-year elections, abortion is tied for the #1 issue. By the way, if we just got everyone out who surged or voted for the first time in a midterm in 2018, we would win these elections. That is 24 million Democrats who did not have regular off-year turnout, vote in presidential years, but not off years. 24 million Democrats voted in 2018. We get those 24 million back out, we win the elections. So it's a very, very concrete target that we're looking at. If we look at the next slide, you can see that the voters that are particularly focused on women's issues like birth control, abortion, equal pay, women more than men, Democratic women in particular, Gen Z, the people born 1997 to 2012, people who are not religious, and they are growing as a proportion of the electorate, and Latinas. Latinas have moved the biggest of anyone in terms of being really pro-choice over this period. And there used to be some resistance among voters of color on the abortion issue, tended to be a little bit more religious, tended to be more worried about some issues like abortion as birth control. African-American women and Latinas have moved very, very dramatically in terms of being more pro-choice and also being more willing to vote the issue. They've been some of the biggest movers in this period since the Dobbs decision. By the way, don't call it the Dobbs decision. Nobody knows who Dobbs is or what a Dobbs is. Call it the overturning of Roe v. Wade, the overturning of abortion after 50 years of constitutional guarantee. If we look at the next slide, another way of looking at this, 83% of voters say that abortion will be important in their decision, 59% very important. And again, look at women more than men, Democrats off the charts, but independents weighing it pretty heavily too. Progressives, Latinas, and Hispanic voters and African-American voters. African-American voters solidly believe that low income and women of color will be disproportionately affected by this ruling. If we look at the next slide, we can look at a whole series of data about the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And first of all, what we see is that now today, and these numbers are actually creeping up into low 60s, anywhere from 59% to 65% of the voters are pro-choice. And that is a dramatic increase. The overturning of Roe made a lot more voters pro-choice. Look at those numbers. 81% of Democrats are pro-choice, 60% of independents, 71% of African Americans, 65% of Latinas, and 73% of AAPI. Voters solidly disapprove of the Supreme Court decision, and they disapprove of politicians getting involved. They disapprove of the bans, and they disapprove of taking away our freedoms and our rights. That language of taking away is the strongest language. The thing that's really affecting people right now is the sense of loss aversion. That's what's most motivating to vote. That's what's most motivating to vote against Republicans. So drawing a clear contrast on this issue. And the Republicans, while they're trying to clean up their records now, said the most dramatic things. They said things like no exceptions for rape, incest, and health of the mother, no prohibiting birth control, that these were states' rights issues. So voters are flummoxed that birth control could be a states' rights issue. They don't think it's any of politicians' business. And for more male voters and libertarian voters, it's also very powerful to say this should be a personal decision, not a politician should not interfere. Politicians should not be making these decisions. Very, very strong language with voters. If we look at the next slide, you can see why you don't want to talk about a 15-week ban or a 6-week ban or any ban, any weeks. 51%. So you've seen all this really pro-choice data. 51% of all voters support a 15-week ban, including 38% of Democrats and 45% of independents. So we don't want to talk weeks, that's their frame. And frankly, in the United States, we've been very, very fortunate in terms of being able to frame this in the debate. The Republicans have had a hard time getting the press to focus on the weekly ban, and we've been quite successful. Usually we're very unsuccessful, and Fox News frames things more than we do, but we've been very successful in terms of being able to frame this as their real goal is a national ban. It's also powerful to talk to voters about the slippery slope, what's next. And people are convinced that they're not done, that what will be next will be birth control, LGBTQ rights, voting protections. So very, very powerful to talk about the slippery slope here and what's next on their agenda. If we look at the next slide, when we talk about protecting abortion, 63% of voters say they would vote to protect abortion. 48% say they would definitely vote to protect abortion. Over 80% of Democrats, male and female, and 3/4 say they would definitely vote. Independent women, 75%. Independent women are the #1 swing vote. That is the vote that all of our campaigns are going after. And one of the things that's very powerful about the abortion issue is it gets at two ends of the age spectrum. It's very motivating to voters under 40, particularly women under 40. And it's very motivating to the baby boomer women my age, because when you say something like abortion will be banned, abortion will be illegal, that's not theoretical to baby boomer women. They remember in their youth when abortion was illegal. And so they are motivated even though they are beyond reproductive health age. And notice even 1/3 of Republicans are cross-pressured on this issue. Now, the Republicans look pretty polarized right now, but we are cross-pressuring them. And while we won't win them, I think it's important that we're drawing the Republicans back in to having to talk to their base rather than talking to swing voters in these last days of the elections. Again, women of color, voters of color in general, 3/4 say they will not vote, half say they will definitely not vote. Very powerful issue to groups that had traditionally been a little less pro-choice. If we look at the next slide, there is no question that this issue favors Democrats. We are 17 points ahead on this issue in terms of who do you trust more. And what's interesting is at the same moment, we are 17 points behind on the economy. So any voter we can get to focus on abortion rather than the economy, it's a win for us already in terms of framing the contest. If we look at the next slide, you can see that voters not just motivated and persuaded to vote our way, but very motivated to turn out. And again, women, Democrats, younger voters, liberals, moderates, Black and Hispanic voters, all very motivated to proactively support abortion rights or the freedom and to reinstate that freedom. If we look at the next slide, let's talk a little bit about the messaging. There are two pieces that are very, very strong in the messaging. First is freedom. No matter where a person lives, what they look like, or what they do, everyone should have the freedom to decide what is best for themselves and their families, including when it comes to abortion. One of the things that's quite interesting here is freedom is the number one value out there for voters, and freedom is the number one word that the right uses more than the left. So this is an opportunity for us to talk aggressively about freedom. Empathy is also very important, particularly to Catholic voters and in less pro-choice areas. No matter where a person lives, what they look like, or what they do, every person's life has its own unique circumstances. People, not politicians, should be able to make their own decisions, including when it comes to abortion care. In the States right now, there is a big debate about whether to refer to persons, people, or to refer to women. And there are some places where this does rub against the voters, and they would prefer to talk about women. But when you talk about needing an abortion, or who should be making this decision, voters usually use the term woman, but they don't care if you use the word people. And in fact, voters, it's very interesting when we said, we talked about transgender people may need an abortion. People were like, oh, I never thought about that. Well, whoever needs an abortion, they should have the freedom to make that decision for themselves, not have politicians interfering. So it's not one of those woke moments where the issue is really dividing people. People are far more united than you would think. So what are some do's and don'ts on messaging? If we look at the next slide, talk about abortion as part of a broader effort to control your decisions, your bodies, interfere with decisions best made with your doctor and loved ones. Don't focus on the cutoff week of the ban. Use language like we talked about, dismantle, unravel, to help people visualize our rights are being dismantled brick by brick. Don't use words like decimate, destroy, gut. It makes people feel like it's too late, like it's helpless. If we look at the next slide, talk about how self-managed abortions, i.e. abortion pills, are safe and they will be outlawed. Don't talk, except if you're talking to older voters, about coat hanger abortions. That feeds a stigma that abortions are not safe. It also isn't the way that young people think about it. 40% of abortions now are medication abortions. And a lot of men have no idea what a medication abortion is. But younger people do. They're very familiar with the term. Say abortion bans, say abortion later in pregnancy. One of the ways in which the Republicans have been coming back on us very aggressively is to talk about heartbeat bills, later term abortion, partial birth abortion, born alive. They've got a born alive initiative in my home state. This is not the language that you want to use, but we have very strong answers on abortion later in pregnancy. First of all, tell people that it is 1% to 2% of all abortions. People guess that 50% of abortions are late. No, it's 1% to 2%. And people think that because, again, they're not very good at math, and they think, well, half early, half late, probably. No, it's 1% to 2%. That is, I'm not usually for statistics, but that is game changing. Because it says to people, wait a minute, this is just a very few abortions, very unique circumstances. Then follow that up with, this is only 1% to 2% abortions, and they happen when something has gone terribly wrong. And then that is a decision that needs to be made by the woman, or the person, their doctor, and their faith and family. Better to say faith than God, by the way. And a lot of younger people who are much less religious than older voters don't like the term, don't like inclusion of faith. So it depends on your audience a little bit. If we look at the next slide, they are trying to right-size themselves. They have gone too far. And some of the language that they will use is, I'm pro-life, but favor exceptions for rape and incest. They're coming back on that. Abortion policy should be left up to state and local governments. Well, what we say to them is, wait a minute. You are proposing a national ban already. This is your true agenda, a national ban. And secondly, that national ban will have no exceptions for rape and incest. Remind people of their true motivation. Anti-choice politicians or anti-abortion politicians do not believe women should have the right or the freedom to make the most personal and private decisions that affect their lives, health, and their families. This kind of language about privacy decisions and politicians interfering is very persuasive to men. In Alaska, in that race that we were talking about, abortion was one of the major issues there, and it influenced both men and women. And the men were influenced because voters said, male voters said, it's none of your damn business, butt out. The libertarian faction of men, for example. Another thing to say, the politicians support taking away the ability of women to control their own bodies and lives and want to give that power to politicians, or the freedom to make their own personal private decisions and give that power to politicians. And it's none of their business. They should not be interfering. Politicians do not belong in the examination room. Another thing that's very, very powerful is the stories that have been told. Normally, stories, we all love stories, but they often don't have that much impact because people try to fix the people rather than the system. The stories here have had tremendous impact, and everybody knows the story of the 10-year-old in Ohio who was the victim of rape and incest, who had to go to another state for an abortion. The doctor is being threatened. Lots of people know the woman going to the hospital with an ectopic pregnancy and the emergency physician saying, I have to get an opinion from my legal counsel before I can help you, et cetera, et cetera. So the personal story is very, very powerful to people. If we look at the next slide, the most dangerous argument they could have made was that science has progressed since Roe v. Wade. Americans always want the new, the shiny, the improved version. And Americans were, including Democrats, very, very sympathetic to this science argument. This is what Roberts wanted the decision to be, and he got rolled by the other members of the court, the newer members of the court. Don't counter with science. Don't get into the science debate, but talk about each pregnancy is different and everyone's circumstances are unique, which is why women should be trusted to make this decision that is best for their situation without the interference of politicians. Also, it's very, very powerful, and including a powerful response to abortion later in pregnancy. One-size-fits-all bans and restrictions put pregnant women in danger and prevent medical providers from offering the best health care to their patients. If we look at the next slide, this is just a summary of what we've talked about already on the later in pregnancies. So that'll be a resource for you. And let's go summarize the next slide, the messages that are out there. Messaging needs to be values oriented. Freedom is the top value, followed by empathy. Everyone should have the freedom to decide, not choose. Everyone has unique circumstance and everyone should decide for themselves. No interference from politicians. The right is doubling down on so-called late-term abortions. And again, remember that they are 1 to 2% of abortions. Every pregnancy is unique. One-size-fits-all laws don't work. And these abortions occur when something has gone terribly wrong. And the decision should be left up to the woman, her family, and her doctor. It helps here to define the villain as conservative politicians who are for a ban, even with no exceptions. And also to talk about these politicians are self-interested. They're trying to hold power. They're trying to divide us. They're trying to maintain control. Talking about the criminalization of doctors, nurses, and women works very well. The strongest language is jailing doctors, nurses, and women. This is very powerful in rural areas. And be sure to include the nurses, not just the doctors. People think wherever there's a doctor, there's a nurse. Well, the doctor probably has legal counsel and insurance. The nurse is just out there on her own or his own. Rhetorical questions also work very well. If abortion is banned, will doctors be forced to lie to their patients? What happens to women who have miscarriages? And older women in particular, appalled at the idea that miscarriages will be investigated or questioned. Remember that Black women, abortion a top concern and a personal concern that they think other Black women will be the most affected by these bans, and Latinas particularly concerned about birth control as well as abortion. Now, not everything works well, and that makes us confident in what we're recommending. Don't discuss hypocrisy. It probably makes all of us on this call, I know it makes me batshit crazy. It makes me furious that they will go to all these extremes for the fetus and then nothing for the kid after the kid is born. And they voted all these things to eliminate the child tax credit, etc. That hypocrisy, very energizing to all of us on this webinar, doesn't work with the voters. So I guess we'll just have to, Americans have a very high tolerance for hypocrisy and also hold mutually contradictory views and usually deeply resent having it pointed out. Again, don't get into weeks, except for the 1 to 2%, don't get into statistics. The frequency, the length of pregnancies, not something that people really notice. And then again, don't talk about back alley abortions. Because that implies that we're doing abortions the same way we did in the 70s. It also makes people think they're a less safe procedure. And you don't really have to get into how the abortions are performed, but people think that young people in particular will go to extreme measures if abortion is banned, and that was dangerous for women, and that word dangerous tests very well. And dangerous for our girls as well. Last slide, and I'll leave this up while we're taking questions. Lead with the powerful value of freedom, drive empathy and urgency, double down on uncaring politicians who only want to stay in power, and channel your determination to invigorate the fight. We haven't lost yet. We can turn this around. We can make a difference, but we have to vote Democratic to do it. So thank you, and delighted to take some of your questions. And actually, we can pull this slide down so we can see each other.
My goodness, I've been taking notes furiously. Thank you so much, Celinda. Angela, do we have some questions from our gang?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
1 second. I was so enthralled by the talk.
I know, it's exactly what we need.
Yeah, it is exactly what we need. I can't wait to change some of my advertising. Our first question is, well, actually, Anne, it's you. You're our first question.
The first question is me. Oh, good. I get to ask the first question. I do have a question. Well, I have so many questions, but I'll ask this one first. At first glance, it looked to me like this federal abortion ban legislation that Lindsey Graham introduced is a huge blunder on their part and a tremendous gift to the Democrats. But do they have some kind of a clever strategy behind it that I'm missing? And what could that be? And how should we be talking about this? Are we running into a trap that they're setting? I don't know. Seems stupid to me.
Yeah, and they're very divided on it. And a good half of their caucus thinks it was quite stupid. And Lindsey Graham doesn't listen to anybody anymore. So he's capable of making quite stupid steps. He was also, if you notice, not surrounded when he introduced it by colleagues. He was surrounded by female heads of anti-choice organizations like Susan B. Anthony Group, etc. But their strategy is to try to trap us into talking about weeks. And we just want to keep saying their agenda is a national ban. If they go to the Senate, if they go to Congress, they will vote for a national ban and no exceptions. And we just need to be relentless on that. And what's really, really interesting is that we have been quite successful in the press about getting them to reiterate that. But don't get into weeks, don't get into termination, don't get into the, sliding scale or something. Just say it's a national ban. Their agenda is very clear. They've been for a national ban, and Mitch McConnell said they were for a national ban with no exceptions.
Okay, yeah.
All right, our next question is from Beatrix from Paris. Do you want to unmute and ask your question? Beatrice? Beatrice, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, my question is about comparisons, can I say that in order to track people in the purple states, can I say that the state that will take away my privacy rights in health will also take away my gun rights, or should I not even bring up guns?
Oh, that's a really interesting question and a complicated one. It depends on what state you're in, and it depends on who you're talking to. Democrats, you don't want to bring up guns, obviously. If you're talking to libertarian men, it's better not to say guns, because they're kind of cynical that guns would be taken away. They think they have the power to prevent that. But it does work to say, what other freedoms will they take away? What other places will these politicians interfere? And let people fill it in for themselves. So with Democrats, you definitely don't want to bring up guns, because Democrats have shifted to be for gun control now, or reasonable gun measures, particularly after Uvalde and Sandy Hook, et cetera. But for more libertarian men in places like Alaska and Montana, so we don't cross-pressure voters, it's probably just easier to say, what other freedoms are they coming after? Where does this stop? What's next?
All right, our next question is from Garland. Do you want to unmute and ask your question, Garland?
Hi, my question is, obviously we're communicating to voters who live abroad, so they have varying levels of interest in what happens directly to people living in the US, because a lot of these things don't directly impact them. One specifically is contraception, which I think seems to be something that's, a lot of us are living in countries where we have access to wonderful universal health care. But have you thought about ways that we might message this to people who are living abroad? Is, obviously it's the values thing, but it's also about things that are directly impacting people we love. Would just like
Yeah.
thoughts.
So there are two ways to approach it. One way is, and you use the word, you chose the word, there's a wonderful ad out called Someone You Love May Need an Abortion. And it shows women in all different situations, including discovering that they have breast cancer, rape and incest, et cetera, and just, already having children, et cetera, et cetera. And that's very powerful to people. And of course, I assume most Democrats abroad have someone they love back in the States. Their kids may go back to the States, et cetera. And a lot of older women very, very persuaded that their daughters and granddaughters will have less rights than they do. And then this idea of what's next. What other freedoms are they going to take away? And one of the ones that is really strong with voters, and I would imagine would be strong with Democrats abroad, is taking away the right to vote, which is kind of a core ideology. So that one is very, very strong as well.
Okay, our next question is actually from me. Looking at all your stats, it's a question that's kind of plagued me for really, I would say, the past 4 years. Why is it that so many white women, if you know this, aren't that interested or concerned about abortion? And what kind of language can we use to convince them that this is something important to them?
Yeah. So part of it is because we have so many Republican white women, and they are more polarized. Another reason is because a number of white women, rightly so, feel disappointingly, but rightly so, feel like this won't affect me. And basically, and this is one of the reasons why African-American women are so energized, because they too feel if you have money, you will get an abortion one way or the other. This will disproportionately affect low income and women of color, and African-American women really, really strongly believe that. And then what's really interesting is evangelical, born again evangelical Christians are two groups of voters, whites, and particularly white women, and African-American women. And it's really interesting that the evangelical African-American women have become very pro-choice in this period. They were more cross-pressured, but they really get the drill now. Evangelical white women have remained the most anti-choice, anti-abortion. So the fact they're Republican, the fact they think that they'll be safe no matter what, and the fact that they are more likely to be evangelical Christian and influenced by their religion.
Thank you. Our next question is from Lee Donald.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you very much for these great talking points and really, really good presentation. And I'm seconding what Angela said. There's a lot that we all could definitely reuse and reshare for people. Really, really appreciate that. You briefly mentioned trans people, trans folk who are also having pregnancies as well. And some of them also are Black, Indigenous people of color.
Right.
Conversations that we have encountering some of these press people, and we're mostly always then confronted with somebody from the Republicans overseas, they always try to blame and victimize us, let's say like that. But which talking points would you go down to pivot that conversation away from being victimized in those situations? Thank you very much.
Yeah, really, really good question. And we haven't done as much work. We've done more defensive work than offensive work, and you are asking the right question. We should be figuring out how to go on offense here. But in terms of defense, the way to answer this is just say anybody who is pregnant should be able to make this decision for themselves, not have politicians interfering. And people are like, yeah, anybody who's pregnant, absolutely right. I hadn't thought of it before, but absolutely right. The place that transgender issues, and they're running them hard in the States, they just put up issues, they're putting up ads against a lot of our candidates on these issues. The two things that are really giving us some problems are quote unquote grooming, that our schools are grooming people to be transgender, their word. And secondly, the whole transgender people in women and girls sports. And there on that issue, we lose even some of our progressive women who fought so hard for Title IX and feel like women won't be able to compete, et cetera, et cetera. And we don't have really great answers on the sports issue. On the so-called grooming or teaching our kids or whatever, that we do have a very, very good answer in, which is for all of our children to succeed, we need our children to be accepted for who they are. And no child should be harmed for who they are. And that's really strong with people. People are like, oh, yeah, I totally agree with that. So that's very, very strong language. But we have a long way to go. We need more offensive research on transgender. We've been doing some work for the Transgender Youth Center, and we've just been hired by ACLU to do some more work right after the election. So really important issue that you've raised. If you have any thoughts about how to answer your own question, we're going to have some ability to test some of that after the elections. So thank you for your question. And yeah, really important. And we're only a quarter of the way there, frankly.
Our next question is from Carol Moore in the UK.
Yes, thank you. Celinda, this has been so informative on such an important issue. Thank you. And my question has to do, as a financial analyst, I will say, statistics. I understand where you're coming from. But for example, the Texas law has now been in place for over a year. And I read recently that the Texas Department of Health was not going to publish statistics on mortality, which is, of course, what we're most worried about. Has anything come out about that in any other state, or is there anything that that we can use on offense in this for, the more the doctors and so forth, and because I think, like you said, the cases of these tragedies is very powerful.
Yes, it's really a good question that you're asking. And as a pollster who likes statistics, I'm very sympathetic to what you're saying. there are two problems with the numbers game. One problem with the numbers game is actually a more powerful argument is making the reverse side of this, which is what is catching on with the public in the States is these stories about tracking women, monitoring and interfering with menstrual apps. And a lot of young women have menstrual apps, et
And
cetera.
and the geographic issues too,
Yeah.
I gather.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The geographic issues, really good reminder. Thank you. So that, we can't argue both. We need statistics, but we don't need statistics. They shouldn't be tracking like this. They shouldn't be interfering with privacy. The second thing is we've had trouble getting the public very energized about keeping statistics. And we almost lost an initiative in California a couple of decades ago on this issue, where some of the people that were taking on race wanted to eliminate all race from statistics. And people thought, well, that's a really good thing because that'll make it non-racist. And we finally had to put C. Everett Koop up, who was then Surgeon General, just had been Surgeon General, and say, we need this for understanding different diseases and developing different cures. And it was the credibility of the spokesperson that moved people. So it's complicated, but you asked the right question, which is, how do we get elites on this issue? And I think I would imagine the most powerful elites are doctors and public health officials, and they tend to be very, very much in favor. So going to state legislatures with the doctors and the public health officials is a powerful way to talk about this. But frankly, they're doing a lot of damage to data collection, and then they're collecting a lot of very bad data. And it's a very complicated arena to talk about this with the broader public.
All right. We have one more question in the chat, Anne. It
Okay.
was from Heather in Vancouver. She writes, a lot of evangelical women that I have known were and are anti-COVID vaccination and use freedom arguments for a lot of this, including my body, my choice rhetoric.
Yeah.
Is there a way to use this view to link it to abortion rights with them?
Brilliant last question, because that's one of the things that's really working for us. And it was one of the things that worked in Alaska for us, for example, in the Mary Patola race. And I encourage you all to get online and look at Mary Patola. She is so exciting. And the first Alaska Native woman elected to Congress. But yeah, it taps into that. And so we're getting some anti-COVID people. And some of us may be like, well, we don't really feed this sentiment, but actually that sentiment's already really strong out there. There's nothing we're going to do one way or the other, but to be able to get a portion of that constituency on our side gives us the ability to win some races that we wouldn't otherwise be able to win. So you're absolutely right about how it works. And that language, all of that language taps into that.
Okay, so we had one more question from Anne, and then we can wrap up, I guess.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions on sort of tagging on to what was just said, what you just said. I'm wondering about if it's useful to use this comparison about invasiveness of abortion as compared to donating blood or donating organs. I've heard people say that a corpse has more rights than a living woman. Is that useful or is that too horrifying?
It's too horrifying to people. And then the other problem we have with that is the organ, what do you call it? The organ, a lot of people are in the organ donation area, but it really cross pressures some constituencies that are very important for us. Like African Americans are really lag way, way behind in terms of organ donation, and much softer in support for organ donation, in part, rightly so, understandably, Tuskegee, everything else, concerned that, our people will be pushed over to harvest these organs. There's a lot of nervousness, and you can understand where that comes from. And so the constituents, the organ transplant people have said, the organ donation people said, do not do this, do not do this. It will be more long-term damage. It doesn't really work that well because the ick factor gets people retreating. And the other thing is we're not short of good arguments. We have a lot of good arguments. And so if we were struggling, it might be worth it to develop some more marginal areas and say, well, we got to win this first, then we'll come back and deal with that. But in this case, we have super good arguments, so we don't have to cross pressure people or do damage on the way.
Okay, that's useful to know. That's really important to know. Do you have one final call to action for us or marching orders that this team needs to do?
Yes. So right now, the turnout of senior citizens in America is projected to be 86%. The turnout of young women under 40 is projected to be 28%. If you know any young women under 40, in the United States, they are very, very likely to be pro-choice, and they are super likely to be mixed about turning out to vote. They are very responsive to social media. They are very responsive to trusted sources. And so reaching out to all of them and saying, you must vote. Registration is about to close down in a number of states. Tell them they got to get registered. They got to go vote.
Okay, that's exactly what we need to hear. I think we're all so grateful. Celinda, thank you so much for sharing this valuable information. I feel like we're all armed and ready to go and do our job now, our getting out the vote job. So thank you so much for being with us today. And as Celinda said, the recording will be available and the slides will be available. Just drop me a line and ask for them. We might put them on the wiki or something. Thanks to all of you. Thank you, Celinda. Thanks to all of you who joined us on the call today. I'd like to say one thing in closing. Again, I'd like to mention our GOTV toolkit again, because we have included some extra tips and talking points, especially around the abortion issue. Not as cool as what we just heard from Celinda, but they're really useful, I think. Finally, I'd like to give a big shout out to all of our great volunteers on the camera and behind the scenes and everybody participating today. I want to let you know that GWC would love to have you step up and help us. Even after the election, we're still looking for help. So please consider stepping up. Angela can put that link in the chat box as well. But for now, we'll say goodbye. I think we all know what we have to do when we get off this call. So thank you so much, and I won't take up more of your time. Thanks a lot, and hope to see you next time. We'll be closing the call. Bye-bye.